Hey everybody. So today I'm going to talk about marine ecosystems, and we talked about freshwater ecosystems the other day, so today I'm going to talk about the ocean, which are the marine ecosystems. So let's talk about why people care about the oceans. So salt water is about 71% of this planet's surface, which is an extremely large portion of it, and they make up about 99.5% of the Earth's habitable volume. So the oceans cover a ton of different area on the Earth. They contain about 250,000 known species, and keep in mind that that is known species of marine plants and animals. There are tons of places in the ocean that we have no idea what else is down there. Most of the time that involves like the super deep places where it's really dark and the pressure is really intense. So there could be, 250,000 more species down there we just don't know about them. We haven't figured them out. So they provide a lot of ecological and economic services. So services that the environment provides for you are called ecological services or ecosystem services. And we'll talk more about them later, but here's some ecological or ecosystem services of the ocean. So the first one is climate moderation. So the earth actually heats up, the land actually heats up a lot more quickly than the water does, and it's due to the specific heat of water. So the specific heat of water you probably learned about in chemistry. It's about 4.184 joules per gram of water, and it takes 4.184 joules to raise the temperature of water 1 degrees. So as the land heats up, the water heats up more slowly, and therefore it's going to allow for some climate moderation. You also have ocean currents that can move around the air and the water, which can bring warm water to an area or cold water to an area to kind of balance out the climate. Nutrient cycling, we've talked about all kinds of nutrients that are found in the ocean and all that kind of stuff. And then this carbon dioxide absorption, so this whole process where the carbon dioxide dissolves into the ocean and then it creates that carbonic acid. So keep in mind that this whole process is normal, it's a natural process, but humans have actually made it worse by emitting so much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And then we've got these economic services like food. So there are a ton of places that require solely fish, and they fish the oceans for their livelihood, that kind of thing. Pharmaceuticals, there have been a ton of pharmaceuticals like anti-cancer drugs that have been found in coral reefs, so that's really important for the pharmaceutical industry. And then minerals, we talked about how you could mine the bottom of the ocean for those minerals and then you could sell them. So let's talk about some saltwater life zones. So we've got estuaries and coastal wetlands. Estuaries, and I've got a slide for each one of these. There's the open ocean, there's the coastal zone, the intertidal zone, and then coral reefs. So the open ocean is going to be the largest portion of all these saltwater life zones. So let's talk about estuaries first. So estuaries are going to be where freshwater and saltwater meet. And a lot of times you'll see that, or you'll hear that the conditions in estuaries, they change relatively quickly. So like, let's say that you have a river and it empties into the ocean. You're going to have the meeting of this freshwater and saltwater, and that's going to create what they call brackish water. So if you ever hear the term brackish water, it means it's a mixture of freshwater and saltwater. So it is very highly variable. Salinity, so salinity is the concentration of dissolved salt, the temperature, the light penetration, all of those are going to rapidly change. And the reason that these are so important is because a ton of different species spend their larval stages here because it's safer than being in the intertidal zone or in the open ocean. So they hide underneath plants and stuff in an estuary, and it's really important. There are two main types. There are mangrove forests and salt marshes. Salt marshes you're relatively familiar with because you've probably been to the coast before and seen like the brackish water or the salt marshes. So let's talk about these mangrove swamps or mangrove forests. So they're basically these coastal wetlands, and they're kind of like these giant forests. So if you look at this picture right here, this is showing you a mangrove swamp or a mangrove forest, and they're on the coast, and they protect from weather extremes, so like tsunamis, hurricanes. But what they actually are these giant trees that love salt water. They're called halophytic plants, and they got the phrase halo from like the halogens. And then phyte means plant, so halophytic plants are plants that like salt. They're found on the southern tip of Florida, Indonesia, India, but Indonesia and India have really started to cut theirs down because they wanted more coastline for more tourism, but then what they didn't realize was actually protecting them from like a tsunami or a hurricane or a typhoon, as they would call it. And there's also high biological diversity there, because there are tons of species that can hide into the roots and in these trees. Whoops. There we go. And there's tons of different species that can spawn here as well, or breed here. This is a guy that's like swimming in a mangrove forest. I don't know why you would want to do that, but you know, go for it. One problem with estuaries is the sediment. So what happens is whenever the river meets the ocean, the river water is going to slow down. And when the river water slows down, all of the sediment that it was carrying is just going to be dumped right there at the mouth of the river. And I've got a picture here to show you in a second. So the increase in sediments, it's going to cause an increase in turbidity. And turbidity is just how cloudy is the water. And if the water is more cloudy, then fish can't see their prey, or they can't see a predator coming. So what they're going to do is they're either going to move away or they're going to get eaten. And sediment plumes are 100% natural, but humans have made them worse from water runoff and sediment runoff from roads, and other things like that. So here's a sediment plume off the coast of Spain. So this is like a satellite image view. So here's the river here, and when it empties out into this ocean or sea here, all of the sediment that it was carrying, the river water was carrying, gets dumped out into here, and it makes it really disgusting. And again, this is increasing the turbidity, which is the cloudiness of the water. Alright, so let's talk about some open ocean zones. So again, the open ocean is going to be like the largest portion of the ocean. Alright, so the neritic zone is going to be called the sublittoral zone sometimes. It goes from the end of the littoral zone to the edge of the continental shelf. So the continental shelf, if you didn't know this already, the continental shelf, after you get a certain number of miles off the coast, the ocean floor drops off dramatically, and it gets really, really deep really quickly. And I'll show you a picture here in a second. And that's the continental shelf. So like right where it starts to get really deep, that's going to be the continental shelf. Here they're going to get tons of sunlight. They have stable water temperatures because of that sunlight, and then the salinity is relatively the same. This is going to be the one that has the most photosynthetic organisms, and therefore is going to have the highest biodiversity. So remember, if you have a ton of sunlight, you're going to get a ton of phytoplankton or a ton of photosynthetic organisms, and then you're going to get stuff that eats those photosynthetic organisms, and that's going to give you really high biodiversity. The photic zone, again, photic or photon, just means light, and that's going to be the upper layer of water where light does penetrate. The bathyal zone, or the midnight zone, is where it kind of starts to go, it's kind of like, it's sometimes called the twilight zone, and the twilight zone is where it starts to get dark, the light stops penetrating as much before it gets into the abyssal zone, and the abyssal zone is going to be where there's no light whatsoever. Think like the anglerfish from Finding Nemo, you know, the one that has the light on his head. This is going to be super dark. A lot of the organisms here are really weird looking. They don't have eyes. And sometimes there are these chemosynthetic bacteria and stuff in the abyssal zone. Alright, so this is showing you the intertidal zone here. This is the neritic zone, which is the closest to the shore here. And then this is the oceanic zone. So if you look here, this is the continental shelf, and then here's the giant drop-off where it gets really, really deep really quickly. The abyssal zone is going to be down here, and then the aphotic zone, or the bathyal zone, is going to be around in here. So let's talk about the intertidal zone a little bit more. Sorry, didn't mean to click that. Alright, so the area between high tides and low tides is going to be this intertidal zone. And it's really intense to live here because, first of all, you're going to have to deal with the constant waves. So the waves hit the shore and then they recede back into the ocean, and you have to avoid being swept away by the undercurrent or the waves. You also have to be able to be submerged during some time and then be in the hot sun during other times. So living in this intertidal zone is really intense. Most of the time, if you're going to live there as an animal or something like that, you're going to have a shell, you're going to have the ability to burrow into the sand, or you're going to have to hold on to something like a rock or a stick or something like that. The intertidal zones can be really different. They can be rocky, they can be sandy, which I'll show you here in a second. And there are different organisms that live in rocky shores versus sandy shores. When it's submerged during high tide, it's relatively normal, like the amount of salinity, the amount of sunlight, all that stuff, it's relatively stable. But then the conditions get really harsh whenever it's low tide, because the sun is really going to dry you out and desiccate you. So here are some examples of things that you might find here. We've got some barnacles. Barnacles are like clams. They anchor themselves to the sides of things. We've got sponges. They anchor themselves as well. Mussels, crabs, and then sea stars. So let's talk about rocky versus sandy shores. So rocky shores are going to be found most likely on the Pacific coast, and then sandy shores are going to be found most likely on the eastern coast or the Atlantic coast of America. The different types of shores are determined by what is the parent material of the rock, because remember, the waves are eroding the rocks, and that's going to make it the rock turn into the sand or the rocky shore. The age of the shore is another big thing. The Atlantic coast is a lot older than the Pacific coast, which is why it has sandy shores instead of rocky shores. And then finally, how intense are the waves? If you've ever been to the West Coast or seen any videos or a movie or something, the waves in the West Coast are really, really intense. So on the Pacific Ocean, they're a lot more intense than the Atlantic Ocean, which explains why a ton of people go out there to surf, and you can't really surf on the Atlantic coast. You can try, but it's not really that great. All right, so here's some rocky shore organisms. And again, we've got things that are going to either burrow or things that are going to, attach to stuff. So we've got a sea star, we've got an anemone, a hermit crab, we've got a shore crab, we've got all kinds of different weird things. These things called nudibranches are really weird. They're like they're kind of like slug, snail mixtures, and they go along the bottom. And they're brightly colored, and they're very poisonous, so things don't eat them. We talked about sea urchins before. They have like the spines, but they have the fleshy interior that sea otters like to eat. We've got kelp, which is a type of algae, algae. And then we've got sea lettuce, which is just a photosynthetic plant. All right, we've also got on a sandy shore, here are some silversides. Those are just little fish. Blue crab, some worms. Sandpiper is a little bird that runs along the shore, and it eats these little things. We've got some sand dollars. So all of these things you may have seen before on South Carolina's coast. Let's talk about barrier islands, and there are tons of barrier islands. And what they are is the ocean currents and the waves and all that stuff have built up sediment in like a line that's parallel to the shore. So the currents have pushed that sediment there, and then they've built up over time and built these islands. They can help protect the mainland from hurricanes or tsunamis, because the hurricane or tsunami is going to hit that island first. But some places have developed the barrier islands into like really big cities. So for example, Atlantic City, it's like a really big like casino city, like gambling city, and it's in, I want to say, New Jersey. And then Miami Beach in Florida is also a barrier island that has been developed. So just to show you some, this is Miami Beach. So this is going to be parallel to the ocean currents. And this is just due to the fact that all of this sediment has been washed up over hundreds of years. So then they developed it and turned it into Miami Beach. I mean, it's super nice to go to, but these things get hammered whenever you have hurricanes and all that kind of stuff. This one is Atlantic City. Atlantic City, as you can see, this is like the long barrier island here. And a lot of times you have like really long bridges and a lot of stuff like that to help you get to the barrier island because it's off the coast. All right, so let's talk about coral reefs. And coral reefs are really interesting. They're really cool. But I bet you didn't know that coral reefs are actually a mutualistic association. So there are two different things to a coral reef. There are the coral polyps and then this photosynthetic algae. So the polyps are the stationary form of the jellyfish. And they're these little animals, and usually how they feed is they feed through luring fish in or stinging something and then using the little tentacle things to get it to its mouth. But these coral polyps have developed a relationship, a mutualistic relationship, meaning both of them benefit from this photosynthetic algae. The photosynthetic algae are called zooxanthellae. and I'll show you how to spell that here in a second. And the photosynthetic algae, they give the coral polyps food in the form of glucose and stuff, and then the photosynthetic algae, they get a place to live. So again, it's mutualistic, it's benefiting most of them. I mean, both of them, sorry. So here is a picture of coral reefs here. And again, what happens is whenever the polyp dies, the zooxanthellae algae, they go somewhere else, and then you've got the buildup of all these different reefs. Like the coral keeps building on each other. So over time, network of crevices, ledges creates this coral reef, and it's really an ideal habitat for a lot of things, because if you look at this picture here, there are just tons of places for things to hide. Some fish, like clownfish, have a mucus coating over their skin that allows them to hide in here and not get stung by the sea anemone. So it's really cool, and it's one of the most biologically diverse places on Earth. But guess what? A lot of the coral reef around the world is actually dying. And this whole process is called coral bleaching. The photosynthetic algae that are inside the polyps, that's what's going to give it the beautiful color. So whenever the ocean temperature gets too high, there's too much carbon dioxide in the water, and the pH goes down too much, then you're going to have some problems. And the photosynthetic algae doesn't like that, and then the photosynthetic algae decides to leave. So when the algae leaves, the zooxanthellae, that's the name of the algae, whenever they leave, the coral doesn't get any food, and since it doesn't get any food, it starts turning this white color, and that's why they call it coral bleaching, because the coral turns white, it starts to die, and then it can also break off, and that's how you get those pieces of coral reef. So here's a picture that's showing you the coral reef and stuff like that. So here's the healthy coral. There's the zooxanthellae. So these are the zooxanthellae. They live in the top of the coral reef, and they provide it with glucose and other sugars for food. But then what happens is maybe the pH of the ocean goes down too much. Maybe the temperature of the ocean is too hot. So then the zooxanthellae leave, and then the corals start to die, and then they start to become bleached. So here is a map that's showing you where coral bleaching is the worst. And there's really bad coral bleaching here along the Great Barrier Reef. There's a ton in Florida as well. And then there's also some off the coast of Indonesia. So a lot of places are experiencing this coral bleaching, and again, it's due to the increase in ocean temperatures, the decrease in ocean pH, and the zooxanthellae leave. And since those algae leave, or the photosynthetic algae leave, they don't have any food anymore, so it causes them to bleach. So that was it for marine ecosystem. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. Here are the different zones of the ocean, and I went through each one of these. If you have any questions, please let me know. I hope you have a great day.